a controversial shooter with a unique life criticized by many and praised by others, but with exceptional talent. Today you will learn the true story of Chris Kyle. The Iraq War's precision shooting record holder, he became a legend shortly after his untimely death, making him known worldwide simply as the American Sniper. Christopher Scott Kyle was born on April 8, 1974 in Odessa, West Texas. He was the first of two children of Wayne Kenneth Kyle, a local deacon and Sunday school teacher, and his wife, Debbie Lynn. Kyle grew up in a deeply religious environment, regularly attending the church where his father preached. At the age of 8, he received his first rifle and began accompanying his father on deer, pheasant, and quail hunt in the region. He spent his teenage years developing his skills on the family farm, tending to the herd of 150 cattle, and handling the daily activities that made up the life of a Texas cowboy. At this time, he also developed an interest in the world of rodeo, riding bulls in small regional competitions. Even without the talent to become a champion, Kyle enjoyed that life, which involved a lot of traveling and parties between competitions. Never having excelled in his studies, he finished high school. And to postpone the responsibilities of adult life, he enrolled at Tarleton State University in 1992, where he studied ranch management. But there, his history of partying and drinking only intensified, and he studied very little during his time at university, which led him to drop out after 2 years. That's when, during a rodeo competition in Rendon, Texas, Kyle had a serious accident. The horse he was riding threw him off and rolled over him, breaking one of his ribs and dislocating his shoulder, as well as causing injuries to his lungs and kidneys. And a set of pins was placed in both his wrists, essentially ending his career in the sport. In 1996, at the age of 22 and without a plan for his life, Kyle decided to pursue an old personal desire, and he went to the military enlistment center in his city seeking to become a Marine. However, at the time he showed up, the Marine Corps recruiter was absent, out for lunch. And Kyle started listening to the recruiters from the other branches. When he learned that Kyle was interested in special operations, the Army recruiter explained to him about the Rangers and their intense training as paratroopers. Kyle liked what he heard, but he still wasn't convinced. That's when the Navy recruiter explained to him about the main special operations unit of the force, the sea, air, and land teams, and their tough and competitive training program, which has a very high dropout rate. The SEALs, an acronym that stands for Sea, Air, and Land, are an elite unit formed by the United States Navy in 1962 to carry out special operations, capture or eliminate high-value targets, and gather intelligence behind enemy lines in maritime, jungle, urban, Arctic, mountainous, and desert environments. Its members undergo what is considered the most rigorous training and use top-of-the-line equipment, enjoying a mythical status within the armed forces. Kyle listened carefully to the recruiter's explanations and from that moment on gave up on becoming a Marine. All he wanted was to become a sea, air, and land. Caught up in the excitement, he filled out the necessary paperwork and gave up his signing bonus. Something they told him would increase his chances of getting the spot. But a few days later, he was hit with a cold shower when a rejection letter arrived in the mail. The Navy had rejected his application because of the pins in his wrists, and Kyle sank into discouragement once again, trying to isolate himself from his reality. The following year, he accepted a job as a rancher in Colorado, driving herds through the state's cold climate. His tedious routine lasted for many months, until a sudden phone call changed his story forever. On the other end of the line was a recruiter from the United States Navy, asking him if he was still interested in becoming a sea, air, and land. With wide eyes, Kyle immediately accepted the invitation, left his job, and returned to Texas. In February 1999, Chris Kyle reported to the naval base in Coronado, California, to begin the 24 weeks of basic underwater demolition, sea, air, and land. The basic underwater demolition sea, air, and land, or basic underwater demolition training. The intense training in which recruits who quit ring a bell and receive a hot meal for giving up includes physical conditioning, combat diving, and land warfare. And at 25 years old, Chris Kyle, who was older than most of his peers, endured the training through sheer willpower. He then proceeded to Sea, Air, and Land Qualification Training, or Sea, Air, and Land Qualification Training, which lasts 26 weeks, in which he distinguished himself in precision shooting practice. It was during this period, while on leave at a bar in San Diego, that he met Ty Astud Baker, with whom he immediately started a romantic relationship. Kyle graduated as a Sea, Air, and Land with Class 233 in March 2001 and was assigned to Sea, Air, and Land Team 3. And the following year, on March 16th, he married Taya. As part of the so-called War on Terror, which followed the events of September 11th, 2001, the George W. Bush administration began an investigation campaign into the existence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which was then controlled by the dictator Saddam Hussein. In the tense months that followed, the transfer of several American military units and their coalition, which included Great Britain, Australia, and Poland, intensified in the Middle East, in a move that anticipated the start of an armed conflict. Among these units was Sea, Air, and Land Team 3, which had its 8 platoons transferred to Camp Doha in Kuwait in September of 2002. There, Kyle got involved in his first operational actions, intercepting Iraqi ships in the Persian Gulf and conducting searches for weapons of mass destruction. In December, off the coast of Yemen, the SEALs found an Iraqi ship carrying Scud missiles. This further increased tensions between the United States and Iraq, even as the United Nations continued to mediate for a peaceful solution. At the beginning of 2003, Kyle was worried about his upcoming return to the United States, fearing he would miss the war, which was slow to start. But secret preparations for the invasion were already in full swing, and Kyle would not have the chance to return home. In the early hours of March 20th, American missiles hit targets in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, starting the invasion of the country. That night, Chris Kyle took the gunner's seat of a desert patrol vehicle, being transported into Iraq in the cargo hold of a Sikorsky MH-53 helicopter, with the mission to take control of refineries on the Al-Faw Peninsula in the south of the country on the border with Iran. The next day, coalition forces invaded Basra province, departing from their bases in Kuwait, advancing northwest quickly by avoiding urban centers. The 1st Marine Division entered the city of Nasiriyah on the 23rd, an important road junction defended by an amalgam of different Iraqi troops, providing cover for the Marines. In the city was Charlie Platoon from Sea, Air, and Land Team 3, which included Chris Kyle's sniper detachment. On a rooftop, watching an approach route used by the Marines, Kyle spotted through his scope a woman who was slowly approaching the group of soldiers in the street, carrying a hand grenade hidden among her robes. In her other hand, she was holding her young son's hand. Kyle reported the situation and received over the radio the order to proceed with taking out the target. Later, he remembered, that woman was already dead. I just made sure she didn't take any Marines with her. It was clear that she not only wanted to kill them, but also didn't care about anyone else who would be killed in the explosion or in the shootout. Kids on the street, people at home, not even her son. Pulling the trigger of his sniper rifle, .25 rifle twice, the woman fell to the ground, dropping the grenade by her side. The following month, the SEALs were sent to conduct reconnaissance of the Shat al-Arab River, which marks the border between Iraq and Iran, while the American armored vanguards advanced toward Baghdad. By late April, Saddam Hussein's forces were shattered, and America controlled the entire country. And then President Bush declared the end of combat in Iraq on May 1st. In July, Kyle finished his first combat tour and returned to the United States, becoming a shooting instructor in Coronado. But the fall of the Ba'athist regime in Iraq created a power vacuum, which was soon filled by various nationalist factions, rival and sponsored by foreign forces, which started a massive insurgency in the country. American troops began to be attacked throughout the territory, in ambushes, suicide attacks, and with the use of improvised explosives on the roads. The monthly death toll began to rise frighteningly, and in the summer of 2004, Chris Kyle volunteered for a second combat tour in Iraq, leaving his wife on the eve of their first child's birth. Kyle arrived in Baghdad in September 2004, and 2 months later, he was sent to take part in the Second Battle of Fallujah. With the fall of the Batista government, Fallujah had come under the control of insurgents led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a Jordanian jihadist who had been very active in Afghanistan. Before settling in Iraq, Zarqawi had 4,000 fighters in the city, who turned Fallujah into the most intense urban battlefield faced by the Americans since the Vietnam War. There, in addition to his service as a sniper, Kyle also took part in house-to-house combat several times. On November 15th, in the midst of an intense firefight with the insurgents, Kyle left his position to pull a wounded Marine back to the American lines. For this and other similar actions in battle, he began to be called the Legend by the Marines. The Americans won the Second Battle of Fallujah at a high cost, with 95 dead and 560 wounded. And as he watched the long lines of coffins, Kyle felt powerless for not having been able to protect them. An uncontrollable feeling was growing inside him that he was responsible for keeping his soldiers alive. In 2005, his kill count gradually grew on the violent streets of Iraqi cities. And even though public opinion in the United States was turning more and more against the war, on the front lines, Kyle only cared about protecting the lives of his fellow soldiers. "I don't think of the people I kill as people. They're just targets. You can't think of them as folks with families and jobs. They live to put terror in the hearts of the innocent. The things they do, beheadings, dragging Americans alive through the streets, the things they would do to children and women just to keep them quiet. That's the easy part of my job. I have no regrets about that." At the end of 2005, he finally finished his second combat tour and came back home, more restless than ever, considering he had left behind the soldiers he was supposed to protect. Kyle's constant tension also began to affect his relationship with his family. He couldn't adapt to ordinary life in the interior of the United States, while the fighting raged half a world away. Despite his wife's pleas, Kyle reported for a third combat tour, arriving in Iraq on a direct flight from the United States. In April 2006, this time, he joined the SEALs in Hamadi, a city located 110 kilometers west of Baghdad. Hamadi had become the scene of a violent struggle between Shiite and Sunni rebel groups, as well as the birthplace of the terrorist group Islamic State. In March, 5,500 American soldiers had been sent to regain control of the city from an equivalent force of insurgents who controlled it, operating in the east of the city starting from April 15th. Kyle provided cover for the slow and steady advance of the Marines, who took control of Hamad by establishing combat outposts along the main roads. Despite the gradual success, all the progress came at a high cost. And on August 2nd, Chris Kyle was deeply affected by the death of Mark Lee, his friend and the first sea, air, and land to lose his life in action in Iraq. But the determined and compact enemy resistance also gave Kyle the highest target density of his entire career. And between April and August, he recorded 91 confirmed kills in successful support actions for the Marines, a feat that earned him the Silver Star decoration on August 27th. A few days later, however, he received the devastating news that his newborn daughter was suffering from leukemia. And on September 5th, Kyle was granted leave to return home while also following his daughter's treatment. He attended on October 12th the funeral of the chief executive officer and posthumous Medal of Honor recipient, Michael Mansour, who had been killed in Hamad on September 27th after throwing himself on a grenade. To protect his teammates, Kyle was supposed to give a speech, but he had a panic attack at the time and was unable to move. He spent the entire year of 2007 trying to balance his family responsibilities and his self-proclaimed duty to his soldiers in Iraq. In this way, Kyle volunteered for a fourth and final combat tour in April 2008. When he was sent to take part in the siege of Sadr Siri, the Shiite district northeast of Baghdad, which was under the control of the insurgents led by cleric Mukhtar al-Sadr, Chris Kyle described this as his worst and most intense combat tour because the insurgents were very well armed, and the presence of rocket-propelled grenade launchers was constant in the clashes. He developed a deep hatred and contempt for his enemies and started wearing a painted skull on his uniform, inspired by the Punisher's insignia, a comic book character. His fame also earned him a $20,000 bounty offered by the insurgents, which was later increased to $80,000. There he also accomplished a rare feat and his farthest confirmed kill. At the window on the house's second floor, he started scanning the horizon when he spotted a dark figure on the roof of a house almost 2 kilometers away. Kyle watched him for a long time, but no hostile behavior was detected. However, when an American convoy approached, the man pulled out a grenade launcher, completely surprising the sniper. Chris Kyle quickly calculated the variables in his head, raised his Macmillan TAC 338 rifle, and pulled the trigger for a fraction of a second. Everything seemed to go silent, and he watched through the scope, incredulous. His target went down at 1,920 meters away. Later, he described his feat as a shot of a lot, but a lot of luck. On August 30th, he finally returned to the United States for good, and, after pressure from his wife, he left the Navy in November. In his 4 combat tours, Chris Kyle had reached the impressive confirmed mark of 160 kills, making him the most successful American sniper in history. In 2009, he opened his own military consulting and training company, Craft International. And in 2012, he published his autobiography, American Sniper, which became a tremendous bestseller, catapulting him to national stardom in a very short time. His book, although praised by the general public, received and still receives harsh criticism for several passages that stray from the truth. Kyle exaggerated his medal count and described combat situations that many colleagues said did not correspond to reality. Surprisingly, he also reported that after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in August 2005, he climbed to the top of a building with his rifle and shot 30 looters, a claim that many consider simply absurd. He also claimed to have punched in a bar fight the former governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura, who sued Kyle for slander and defamation, claiming he had never met him in his life. Eventually, the court ruled that Chris Kyle had made up the whole story to benefit himself in the media, and Ventura won a large sum in compensation. Finally, Kyle claimed he was approached by 2 robbers who wanted to steal his car at a gas station near Dallas, and that he shot and killed both of them to protect himself. But when contacted, the Texas police found no record of this incident. Between book-related events and television interviews, Kyle volunteered in a program assisting war veterans who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He believed that reliving the positive aspects of the operational environment, such as camaraderie and shooting practice, could help his peers gradually overcome their traumas. That's why he took them to shooting ranges. On one of those occasions, on February 2, 2013, he tried to help former Marine Eddie Ray Ralph, 25 years old, by taking him to the Rough Creek shooting range. There, around 3 p.m., Ralph drew his pistol and shot Chris Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield multiple times, killing both of them and then stealing Kyle's car. That same night, Ralph was caught by the police and, in February 2015, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murders. His funeral procession was accompanied by thousands of people on the roads to Austin, where he was buried in the Texas State Cemetery. Today, a statue in his honor stands in his hometown of Odessa, and a highway in the state also bears the name Chris Kyle. The figure of the sniper still divides opinions in the United States, with many despising him as a symbol of a disapproved war and others praising him for his actions in that same war. His premature death, at the height of his strength, only helped to separate Chris Kyle from his human figure, forever immortalizing the legend of the American sniper. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications. When I post more videos, I'll be here. Thank you again for watching. And how about that hug from the war room?